Welcome to our History Channel.
Welcome to this explainer where we are diving headfirst into the incredible realities of ancient Egypt. Today we're going to peel back the myths, skip the Hollywood stereotypes, and look directly at the facts to see how human beings living thousands of years ago in the middle of one of the harshest environments on Earth literally achieved the impossible. We're going to figure out exactly how they built a deeply sophisticated civilization with legendary monuments that are still standing today. So, let's kick things off with the big questions you've probably asked yourself a million times, starting with their absolutely astonishing engineering. I mean, without modern cranes, steel cables, or combustion engines, how exactly did they move enormous blocks of stone weighing tons? And we also have to wonder about the people doing the work, right? Beyond the famous pharaohs and their palaces, what was daily life actually like to sustain this massive civilization? What were ordinary Egyptians eating and drinking while putting together these massive structures? Then, of course, we need to unravel the fascinating reasons behind their most famous, and let's be honest, kind of bizarre-seeming rituals. Why on earth did they go to such extreme, meticulous lengths to preserve the bodies of their dead? And finally, what was the true, underlying purpose of the pyramids? What kind of drive does it take for an entire society to commit to constructing the most legendary monuments in human history? To answer all of these questions, here is our roadmap for this explainer. 1. From desert to the Nile. 2. Rise of the Pharaohs. 3. The quest for eternity. 4. Engineering the Great Pyramids. And 5. Hidden tombs and human legacy. All right, let's jump straight into part 1. From desert to the Nile. To really wrap our heads around this civilization, we have to start at the absolute foundation, which comes down to geography and a pretty dramatic period of climate change. You see, the Egyptian civilization wasn't actually born in the sand. If you go back to around 11,000 BCE, much of the Sahara was considerably wetter. We're talking grasslands, lakes, and rivers. Groups of hunter-gatherers were actually thriving there, even building these remarkable stone arrangements at a site called Nabta Playa to track astronomical events. But over thousands of years, the African monsoon weakened. The lakes dried up, and those grasslands slowly turned into the endless sea of sand that we know today. This massive climate shift basically forced communities to migrate toward the remaining water sources, centralizing the population right around the incredibly fertile Nile Valley by 3100 BCE. The seasonal flooding of the Nile deposit this rich, dark sediment, creating the perfect environment for growing wheat and barley. And fun fact, they used that grain to make bread and beer, which formed the absolute backbone of the ordinary Egyptian diet. Moving right along to part 2, Rise of the Pharaohs. So as that population clustered along the Nile and agriculture really took off, those small villages naturally grew into massive settlements. But that creates a huge new challenge, right? Who controls all this land, the water, and this huge supply of stored food? Well, it required a highly organized society. As political power centralized, a ruler named Narmer unified Upper and Lower Egypt around 3100 BCE. And to manage this massive new kingdom, they essentially had to invent large-scale administration. They developed hieroglyphic writing using symbols for sounds and ideas, specifically to record taxes, laws, and trade. That invention alone allowed them to build a vast system of scribes, priests, and soldiers. Plus, they turned the Nile into a literal superhighway, building boats to transport grain and stone, and setting up a thriving trade network with neighboring regions to bring in highly valuable timber, copper, and gold. Now, sitting at the absolute top of this whole system was the pharaoh. But here's the thing, they weren't just politicians. Kingship was deeply tied to the divine order of the universe, rooted in a core concept called Ma'at. Ma'at represented truth, balance, justice, and cosmic order. The pharaoh was essentially the earthly anchor who is expected to maintain this order. It goes to show that their religious beliefs weren't just spiritual, they were a practically essential tool for societal stability and organization. Which brings us to part 3, the quest for eternity. With order and immense wealth established in their daily lives, the Egyptians decided to point their organizational genius towards something else entirely, the afterlife. Because they firmly believed preserving the physical body was essential for living in eternity, they developed mummification. But we often think of this as some sort of ancient magic. It wasn't magic, it was hard chemistry. A key component was natron, which is a naturally occurring salt mixture that they used to carefully dry out and preserve the body. Mummification was a meticulous step-by-step scientific procedure. First up, they removed the internal organs, and yes, it's totally true, that famously included pulling the brain out through the nose.
They preserved the organs separately, but they usually left the heart inside the body because of its profound religious significance. Next, they thoroughly dried the body out using that natron salt we just mentioned. Then they treated the body with very specific oils and resins before wrapping it super tightly in endless layers of linen. The ultimate goal here was purely practical in their eyes: ensure the physical vessel remains completely intact for eternity.
And that naturally leads us into Part 4, Engineering the Great Pyramids. So, preserving a royal body required a suitably monumental tomb. But the Great Pyramid wasn't just built on their first try out of nowhere. It was the culmination of literally centuries of experimental engineering. They actually started with mastabas, which were these large rectangular brick structures built over underground tombs. Then, a brilliant architect named Imhotep came along and designed the step pyramid for Pharaoh Djoser, basically stacking stone levels on top of each other. Later on, during the reign of Pharaoh Sneferu, engineers started experimenting with flat angles. That gave us the bent pyramid, and eventually the red pyramid, which was one of the first successful true pyramids. All of that intense trial and error paved the exact path for the ultimate monument, the Great Pyramid, built for Pharaoh Khufu at Giza. To put this into perspective, standing originally at a staggering 146.6 meters tall, or about 481 feet, the Great Pyramid was the tallest human-made structure in the entire world for thousands of years. Just think about that. It required astronomical quantities of stone, utilizing core limestone from Giza, finer outer casing from Tura, and massive granite blocks that they had to bring from as far south as Aswan. So, how on earth did they pull this off? They had no modern cranes, no diesel engines, but they did have brilliant physics, mathematics, and sheer human willpower. Those enormous blocks were transported by boat along the Nile. Once on land, teams of workers pulled the stones on heavy wooden sledges. And get this, modern experiments suggest that wetting the sand directly in front of the sledges actually reduced friction, making them way easier to pull. They used incredibly complex ramp systems to haul the stones up as the pyramid grew taller. But perhaps the most mind-blowing part? They utilized expert surveyors to achieve extraordinary precision, perfectly aligning this immense structure with the cardinal directions, on foundations that are almost perfectly level. Okay, we really need to stop right here and bust a massive myth. You've almost certainly heard the legendary stories or seen the movies showing masses of chained slaves being whipped to build these monuments. It is absolutely false. Modern archaeological evidence definitively proves this was a massive, unified national project built by highly organized, skilled citizens. These workers were well housed, they were provided with real medical care, and they were well fed with high-protein diets of prime beef, fish, and, you guessed it, plenty of beer. It wasn't a slave camp. It was the ultimate testament to a highly organized society working together for a common cause.
Finally, let's wrap up with Part 5, Hidden Tombs and Human Legacy.
You know, the Great Pyramid building age couldn't last forever. The obvious problem with building a giant 400-foot-tall beacon of unimaginable wealth is that it essentially functions as a giant rob me sign. After dealing with relentless grave robbers, the civilization was forced to completely pivot. To protect their royal burials and the insane wealth buried alongside those pharaohs, Egyptian rulers went underground. They started hiding their tombs, carving these incredibly secretive rock-cut chambers deep into the mountains near ancient Thebes. This entire landscape eventually became famously known as the Valley of the Kings. And this deliberate, massive shift to secrecy is the exact reason why we have one of the most famous archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. A young pharaoh named Tutankhamun ascended to the throne as a mere child and died very young. Because his tomb was relatively small and squeezed into the valley, it managed to remain perfectly hidden from robbers for over 3,000 years. When British archaeologist Howard Carter finally stumbled upon its hidden entrance in 1922, they opened it to find an astonishing, entirely untouched collection of furniture, weapons, jewelry, and of course, the truly legendary golden burial mask of the boy king. The breathtaking, almost unbelievable wealth of King Tut's tomb reveals a profound truth that I really want you to take away from this explainer today. We so often look at mummies and golden coffins and naturally assume this was a culture obsessed with death. But actually, that's entirely backward. Ancient Egypt was a civilization completely obsessed with continuity. They loved life, their identity, their families, and their cosmic order so much that they wanted it all to continue forever. Their writing, their massive temples, and their heavily protected tombs were all expressions of this fierce, undeniably human desire to preserve their existence against the relentless sands of time.
Because at the end of the day, behind the towering monuments and the shining golden masks were just ordinary humans, Farmers, craftsmen, scribes, and families who lived, loved, worried, and dreamed about the future in much the same way we do right now. They desperately sought to leave a lasting mark on the world, and well, they succeeded. The ideas, the mathematics, and the sheer achievements of humanity truly can survive for thousands of years. It really invites us to wonder, as we continue to sift through and explore the ancient landscape of Egypt today, what other remarkable, unbelievable secrets are still hidden beneath the sands, just waiting for us to uncover.